Hello and welcome to Health Exposure. Today we have an interesting show. As always, what can I possibly tell you? My favorite person is on, and that's Deborah. And without lingering any longer, let's go right to it. And she brought a friend, by the way. Hi, Deborah. How you doing?
Hi, Kurt. I'm great. How are you?
You're always great. I'm afraid to tell you because you say, oh, you're eating good today.
I had a banana before we came on.
Okay,
yes.
Well, good. Well, you brought somebody with you.
This is Barbara. Barbara is one of my clients.
Hi, Barbara. How you doing?
She's great. She's been dealing with diabetes for a couple years now, and the onset of her diabetes started around the age of 2021. So we're going to actually present Barbara as an interesting case study because she's worked very diligently and very methodically in really addressing some of these imbalances, which I think is pretty spectacular, especially for someone in their 20s, because as you know, your lifestyle in your 20s is not indicative of stability. I mean, everyone likes to have a life and to have a life.
Can I take a pause just to remember the 20s? I mean, my 20s.
Sure. Yes,
oh, good.
yes,
I remember the 20s.
Yeah, so
Shame
do
on you.
I.
Oh, my goodness.
But that's just the case in point, Kurt. It's really difficult, you know, when you're young and you're full of life and you're feeling good and your friends are going out and they're partying and, you know, you want to go to a baseball game and have a couple beers to really control things like diabetes or your blood sugar. And Barbara has a compiled problem or situation where she's hypothyroid as well.
I want to thank you for having the courage to come on the show and share with our viewing audience and also with us. So it brings us to I guess the pertinent question or the inevitable question, what is diabetes?
Well, I'm sure many people out there suffer from diabetes. It's a pretty popular condition, but it is the inability of the body to control and regulate sugars. So if you can't do that, then you have a problem whereby the body produces either too much insulin, not enough insulin, and that deregulates throughout the course of your day. And foods certainly have an affect on the ability for the body to regulate sugars. So as you know, or maybe you don't know, Kurt, all foods are converted into sugar called glucose, and then it's then converted into glycogen, which is stored in the muscle or in the liver for future use up to 12 hours after ingesting those foods. And depending on the amount of sugar naturally occurring in foods, your body either produces more insulin or less insulin. So Barbara maybe should give us a little bit of an overview about a bit of your history. When she did come in, she came in with a number of presenting problems, and we'll get into those in a little bit. But energy was the primary problem.
So Barbara's actually a client of yours. Oh,
yes.
I see. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, before we do that, though, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems as though more and more younger people are reporting diabetes. Is that, what's the cause of that?
Well, that's a very good point, and the health trend in America today is shifting into this downward spiral where we're seeing younger and younger people in our population here developing diseases that we shouldn't see until we're older, much older actually, including cancers. So basically the problem is a lot of the kids today, especially this age group, you know, in their 20s, we're growing up primarily on fast foods, you know, more processed foods. Kids are drinking coffee at a lot younger age. I mean, I have kids who are 10, 11, 12 years old who are drinking coffee with sugar as their primary ingredient, or sodas with caffeine, which also deregulates insulin. They're eating absolutely no fiber in their diet, primarily dead foods that are processed, low protein, high carbohydrate, again processed carbohydrates. They're missing minerals which help to regulate and balance insulin production, and they're actually skipping meals. So if you're doing nothing but that as a mainstay, you're looking at this poor little system that's like up and down like a roller coaster all day long. Insulin up, insulin down, insulin up, and pretty soon you just become fatigued and the pancreas can't regulate insulin production any longer. So that's what happens basically when you don't really address your diet. And it's not that people don't know. You know, I mean, it's not that people know how to change it. They don't, because kids are latchkey kids. They're coming home. There's one parent home at night, and you know, you take whatever's in the freezer. You know, these kids grab whatever's available, and it's usually a snack item. You know, who grabs an apple? Not very many kids. You know, not many kids are going to grab a piece of fruit or a carrot stick. Or
of course, my kids did. They used to throw it at each other. I don't know what you mean, to eat it
food
or
fight.
Okay.
Good food fight stuff. Bing.
Barbara, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Kurt?
Pretty good. A little nervous?
A little.
Don't be. Just think that there are thousands of people out there interested in learning your story. And you know, it's a wonderful thing because they get to learn firsthand up close that there's something that could be done about a problem that exists in this country. So I'm very, very pleased for you to come over. Why don't you tell us, first of all, how old you are?
I'm 24 years old. I developed diabetes when I was, I think, 21 years old. And I have a history of, my father was diabetic. He was diagnosed when he was 45. And that kind of gave me some background into some of the symptoms that I had been, the symptoms I had recognized as being probably leading into diabetes. And so I kind of caught that just dealing with my father.
Now, prior to going to nutrition consultants, what were some of the things you noticed, and what have you noticed since you have been under the auspices or help of Deborah over here?
Prior to seeing Deborah, my eating habits, which I thought were okay, were, you know, when I later found out, really weren't. I was on a high carbohydrate diet, low protein, relatively low fat diet. And for someone who's diabetic, it's hard to digest all those carbohydrates. So I was feeling really lethargic and fatigued, not a lot of energy, and my mood swings were really unstable. And that was just basically what I was experiencing. I just was never feeling balanced and happy.
I see.
And maintaining a happy, you know, cheerful, like bubbly attitude that I once used to.
Also, if I could just interject real quickly, I believe, Barbara, you came in and at one point you had been really, really, really thin a few years back, right? And then she had seen a dietitian at the hospital, and she had put her on, I think it was, you said 70 grams of carbohydrates at each meal,
Right.
which is 210 plus grams of carbohydrate a day. And what we did is we shifted that and brought her down by almost 50% in the carbohydrate department and moved her into live carbohydrates, fruits and vegetables that contain fiber. But again, the problem is that she also experienced constipation when she came in, along with that low energy. And she had a body fat that was in the normals. I mean, her body fat, she's nice and lean, but she'd like to have been leaner. So we took her body fat down from 28.7% to 23.4%. And she doesn't have a consistent exercise agenda. It's, her lifestyle is very busy. She works, she goes to school, she has a life. So she works out 2 to 3 days a week, which isn't a fat-burning exercise agenda. But she's managed with dietary changes to bring body fat down by over 4%. So that's really quite impressive. And of course, as you know, if there's less body fat, there's more of a chance to regulate insulin. So.
Oh, I see. Well, that's something I didn't know. So, knowing that you have this, and I must have been at a very young age of 21 to get that kind of information where you have something that I guess is classified as a disease, or okay, and realizing that you needed help. How did you get the realization of this, maintain a life, or having a life, and just press on knowing that you would have to use a regulatory food program of some kind? What gave you the courage or the consistency or the strength?
Well, really, after I was diagnosed with the diabetes, it hadn't affected me. I just thought, okay, let's move on. Let's make the changes that I need to make. And so I wanted to, you know, not let it stop my life, but move on. And through the process, I moved out of my parents' house and moved here to Chicago, and wanted to establish some sort of independence through my diabetes. And my mother has always been really proactive in preventative medicine. So I had a background in that, but I felt that just my overall wellness, I was not feeling as healthy as I knew I could be. And that's when I just really decided that I needed to take charge and, you know, establish a dietary plan that I could work on for life. And, you know, it's not something that happens overnight. I mean, it's definitely something you have to work on, and it's, you know, a daily process. But
you know, I think that requires a lot of maturity and consistency and commitment. I commend you. That's very impressive.
Oh,
that really
thank you.
is. Deborah, what sort of dietary program did you put her on? What kind of changes did you actually bring in that
helped to balance her a little bit? Well, initially, I think you were spiking with your insulin between, you were going down to 40 on your on your readings, and she was popping up over 300. So her blood sugar was just fluxing all over the place, and we found that, again, the high carbohydrates were problematic for her. So, you know, I think a little bit of what is important here is also giving some information about your childhood history, because she ate relatively good as a child, right? I mean, a lot of complex whole grains and maybe not as much protein and not as enough fat and things like that, but or unsaturated oils.
Right.
But still wholesome foods for the most part, because your mom's a pretty good feeder, right? She took
Right.
good
It
care
was
of your
probably,
kids.
I mean, the time that I went away to school that I kind of weaned away from that, because, I mean, growing up, I always wanted the sugar cereals and the potato chips, and that was not in our house at all. So,
You know, that's funny, is when my daughter went off to college, she started eating Captain Crunch every day for breakfast, because we never had it in our home. So did you do that?
do I have to tell the truth?
Yeah. No, you know, it's really good information for people to know what you did eat that kind of made you turn the bend from a glycemic standpoint. So what did you eat in college?
Oh, gosh. Like I said, just...
More fast foods? Or?
What was cafeteria dorm foods? I guess fast foods.
More soda
but just,
pops or coffee?
Well, definitely less fruits and vegetables and the whole grains that I had grown up on, and more saturated fat foods.
Which really deregulates your insulin as well. Saturated fatty acids will do that. Yeah, so if you lose fiber and you do more of the saturated fats, and I don't know if you were ever a coffee drinker, I don't remember.
I wasn't
That's
until
good.
recently.
Which brings me to the question that,
Coffee? What's wrong with coffee?
trust me, we won't get into that one.
Yes, we will. We should.
That goes a few shows back, and I
Coffee
managed.
spikes your insulin. Coffee is just like a big floodgate of insulin.
Absolutely,
It's
that's
just-
something I found out. And Deborah was so kind, she didn't ask me in front of our television audience how much coffee I drank at any given period. I asked the same question you asked. Do I have to tell the truth on this? What is a glycemic index of foods?
Okay, well, we'll come to that. That's a good question,
Okay.
Kurt, and it's important for people to know what the glycemic index is. But real quickly, I don't remember, Barbara, were you exercising when you came in?
I've always
Exercised, right. And what about calories? How many calories were you consuming a day? Because I couldn't find that original log.
1,800 to 2,000.
So you were
I think
eating
so.
plenty, they were just imbalanced calories. So
Right.
what we did is we shifted it. So Kurt, coming back to your last question, what did we do to implement? Well, I started Barbara on food logs, and I meant to bring her chart because I wanted to show our viewing audience how many food logs this girl has filled out. I've kept every log she's ever written. And she started with me in November, and she has done a log every day nearly. I'm sure there's a week or two in there that you haven't done logs, but she has written down what she's done, and she's also tallied her readings, her insulin readings every day, her sugar readings every day.
That's incredible.
Next to the foods. So she's,
I mean, it really is.
She's logged. We found a couple months ago her blood sugar was spiking up to over 300 after breakfast, and I took a look at her food logs, which I could not have done had she not been diligent in doing them, and she was eating rye toast. She was doing her oil, she was doing her egg whites, and she was throwing in a slice of rye toast, I think. And I said, you know what, just for the heck of it, take the rye toast out. Let's see what happens. She took it out, boom, 140, 150 on her reading. So the rye toast just didn't sit well with her in the morning, and that's the one thing people need to know. You have to play with your foods. And everybody is biochemically very different. And you know, Barbara cannot do well with rye bread in the morning, but she's fine with it at lunchtime. Someone else might need that rye bread in the morning and not at lunchtime. So you really have to be diligent in doing your food logs, which is what she did. And she takes the time to go shopping every week. She takes the time to prepare most of her foods most of the time. She does eat out, but she's really, really taken control of her own health. She's not looking for a doctor to give her a pill, you know, or somebody to fix it for her. And she's very proactive, just like your mother is, I presume, in taking that stance in her health. And it's really hard to do because people are intrinsically very busy and lazy. You know, it's just much easier to take a pill and have somebody fix it, but that doesn't work. It doesn't work for most people most of the time. So she has been very unique in the fact that A, she's really young, and B, she's been very diligent with logging and tracking and trying to help me be her own doctor by figuring out what works for her and what doesn't work for her. And you're eating, what, 6 times a day or 5 times a day on an average? So she does regular feedings. She goes 2 to 3, 4 hours, and then she has another feeding, and keeps that, you know, that insulin production very stable, or as stable as she can. So I think all of those factors, doing your logs, calculating, marking, making sure she balances her proteins to her oils and her carbohydrates, eating lean proteins that are low in saturated fat, eating high fiber foods, that help to control insulin production and doing the low saturated fat and the good unsaturated oils. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. I don't know
Well,
that
that
people
is.
can do that all by
Yes.
themselves. It's hard work. She's done it.
You ever stop and congratulate yourself? And say thank you?
Yeah.
No, no.
She just plows ahead. Barbara's real practical.
I don't really stop to think. It's just, you know, always looking for a way to improve it. So.
Right. So it takes application, and the one thing that is important too, and I think, did you know about the glycemic index, Barb, before you came in?
Not before I came to you.
Well, the glycemic index of foods is a rating scale for foods, Kurt, and it basically, on a scale of 0 to 100, shows you what foods really help to regulate or stabilize insulin production and what foods will create a reaction where you produce too much insulin or not enough insulin. So basically what you have are foods that are very high in sugars naturally occurring, like carrots and bananas. And processed foods are very high in the glycemic index, will evoke a greater insulin response. And the foods that are lower in the glycemic index, like our proteins and our seeds and our nuts and our high fiber foods like whole grains, you know, the very dense grains that break your toe, the kind of breads if you drop them they hurt. Those kinds of grains will all help to stabilize glycemic index. And the most important thing is those three food groups mixed with oils, which have a neutral effect on insulin, will in fact, blended together, help to regulate insulin even more efficiently.
Oh, I see. I didn't know
So,
that. That's fascinating. You're nodding your head with knowledge. See, that's the
Well,
one
it's
thing I must admit, and I'm sure, and it's something that I've, through inculcation, have tried to tell people that when you go to Deborah, you learn.
Definitely, absolutely.
And so you walk away empowered as well as helped. And it sounds like as you're shaking your head, I'm going, really? What? You know, so
Right, she's like a mini nutritionist. And
that's
you know,
incredible.
it's really important, Kurt, like you say, you learn. You know, there's no shortcut to nutrition education. There's not. I've tried it. You know, I tried having people not do food logs, but unless someone really documents what they do, then old habits will supersede and they sneak back in. You end up going, people go, oh, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, but if they haven't logged it, and you tell them, okay, give me a one-day recall, they're right back to like that 60–80% carbohydrate, low protein and no fat. I mean, that's what Americans consume because we've had it pounded in our heads, you know, that we're not supposed to eat fats and oils. You know, we're not supposed to eat a lot of protein because it's too saturated. We're supposed to eat carbohydrates because they're no fat. Well, we're seeing hypothyroid, lots of blood sugar, you know, hypoglycemia and diabetes popping up all over the place. Those diseases or those health conditions will help preempt or set the stage for other problems later on. They lower immunity and they make you more suspect or more, you know, fallible towards developing things like cancer or, you know, a full-blown onset of some particular disease, call it leukemia or whatever. But you need to really make sure that you balance your body chemistry when you're young, like Barbara's age. Otherwise, growing older is going to be hellacious. It's going to be very problematic. So, yeah, you have to educate, educate, educate. It's a lot of work, but it's fun because now she knows her body.
And it seems to be working. How do you feel?
I definitely feel at least, if not 100% better, just about 100% better. I mean, my energy level has greatly increased. I just really remember just really feeling really lethargic in the morning and almost like I had a headache and just kind of like walking with my shoulders hunched, just, you know, dragging all the time. And I definitely feel that my lifestyle is easier, learning about the my new diet that Deborah has set for me, and I have more energy to exercise and just really make it through the day. I mean, the energy was my major problem.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. And you look fine. You look well. My goodness, my goodness. Deborah, what other tests do you find useful for assessing deficiencies such as for minerals, which are so vital to regulating the pancreas and endocrine system?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, we have, you know, the blood test, the standardized chem screen, which gives us a glucose reading, and that's very handy. And of course, you do the home self-prick test, right? How often do you use that?
Do it 4 or 5 times a day.
You do.
So every meal before bed, and then depending on exercise, before and after exercise.
And that's another good thing to know, that she needs to eat before she exercises. to really maintain stability, or not let, you know, more than 2 or 3 hours go. If you're going to exercise, you better eat something before you exercise.
Now, is that a good rule of thumb with everyone, or
Well, it's
specifically with diabetics? Or?
I find that for people who don't have particular health concerns, eating lightly before they do eat helps them to actually burn more fat. Not a lot, but eating something, if nothing else, than a good protein drink, you know, which is real easy on the gut, and it does help to regulate insulin. So you don't end up burning insulin, you go longer and stronger, especially if your workouts are going to go over 50, 60 minutes. And being diabetic, it's really important that she has enough fuel in her tank. You know, otherwise she will burn insulin after 60 minutes or 70 minutes, and that's very dangerous. You can do that even if you're not diabetic. You end up becoming very weak, fatigued, you get chilled after you exercise, and that's a sign that you're burning something other than fat. Not good.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So the other test that we utilized was the hair tissue mineral analysis. And again, Barbara, I'm sorry I left it there, but I know your calcium was high, wasn't it?
It's the calcium, copper, aluminum.
And aluminum were all high. And that test, basically, in her selenium, her chromium was very low, your manganese was low, your iron was low, and magnesium.
You're talking Greek to us. What did we, whoa, wait, what?
Okay, these are trace minerals, Kurt.
Okay, trace
and
minerals.
The body, of course, is made up of trace minerals. So there are different trace minerals in varying amounts.
Now, these are minerals you brought with you to show us?
They're in her tissue.
Oh, in your tissue.
Yes. Yes. So what we do is we basically take a hair sample and we test the hair, and the hair then gives me a reflection of what she has in her storage tank, which is the tissue in the body, for the past 10 years. So if there are extreme deficiencies, you'll see, especially in diabetics, they're very low in selenium, in chromium, and manganese.
I see.
Also hypothyroid, selenium, manganese, and magnesium are all necessary for thyroid activity, and she also has that. So all of those values were needed, were exceptionally low. Copper is a blocker if there's a high amount of copper, and you had high copper. And that copper blocks, of course, her chromium and her selenium. And then she also had high aluminum, which is a toxic heavy metal. And aluminum is a bully. He's like the 12-year-old who looks like he's 16 in the playground. You know, he occupies a lot of space. He comes along, pushes everybody else out of the way. So aluminum and calcium are kind of what we call bully. One is a toxic mineral, and one is just a very dense. Calcium is a very dense mineral, and it actually blocks thyroid activity. So she had a high level of calcium too, which needs to be driven down. And the aluminum, of course, you know, creates all kinds of problems. It deposits in the heart, it deposits in the adrenals and the brain. So you need to get aluminum out of the system because they're such dense minerals, they attract more of the same. So it's really, really important to get those down balanced, and you do that by putting in chelating agents. Chelating agents are other minerals and or vitamin C and or protein foods like methionine, cysteine, and cysteine that bind those heavier calciums, or things like aluminum, drag them to the liver kicking and screaming because they don't want to go bye-bye, they want to stay in the system. And then you have to bind them in the liver and pull them out of the GI tract.
I see.
And that takes about a year. I mean, depending on how high. Her calcium, I think, was 100 and something.
So how long has she been coming?
6 months.
6 months, okay.
So we'll retest her hair shortly. I retest every 6 months. I don't like to do it before then, because once you start moving heavy metals out and around the body, if you take the test within 3 to 4 months, you might see some of those levels actually elevated, just like cholesterol. If you test too soon, those values go up because they're circulating. They're free. They're not bound in tissue. So in 6 months, though, you normally see some really good affected changes. You'll see some of those trace minerals coming up. So now what she's doing is she's taking a lot of supplements, basically in specific amounts, to pull up the little weaker minerals that she's missing. And that also helps to displace the ones she has too much of. So it's a very good test for diabetics. It's a very good test for hypothyroid.
I also wanted to add to that the overall reading after I went back and had the analysis done. It was interesting to find out that the high calcium and the high aluminum and the deficiencies I had all had a part interplaying with my thyroid, and perhaps if I had taken the test before I had been treated for my hyperthyroid,
It could have offset the onset of diabetes.
Right.
That's an important statement. That's a very important statement.
Well, that's a good point, because there is a relationship. People are like, oh, if I have one disease, I can't get another. But you know, once you get one, it's a downward spiral. It's like you're just suspect and you're at risk for developing the next and the next. That's like when I tell people, you know, I do work over at Cook County and Providence, and I tell them, you know, if you control your diabetes, you probably won't get glaucoma, you won't have to deal with gout, you won't have to deal with, you know, hyperthyroid. I mean, this is what happens to people. It's like one catches the next, catches the next, catches the next. So all these minerals are very important. And if I may put this out there too to our viewing audience, America's soil is very mineral depleted. And it has been for quite some time. And the reason for that is because we have so many pesticide residues in our food chain, you know, that we just dump on our soil to keep all those bugs off there. It increases productivity, increases, you know, longevity of the grain or the fruit or the vegetable, and we're eating that stuff. And that's displacing your minerals as well. So not only are these foods mineral deficient, but you're bringing in aluminum and mercury, which is sprayed on our foods, you know, as a binding agent to keep those pesticide residues on there if it rains, and you end up ingesting that, and that displaces your minerals even more.
My goodness.
Oh, gross.
My goodness, something else for me to go to bed and think about tonight. Thank you very much. But there's a solution. You see, here's how it works. We get people like yourself and myself and our viewing audience healthy, get them good hair. And so when we just cut an excess of hair, put it in the soil, so you get a good minerals. Yep, I've solved the problem.
Take some take your nails and your toenails, put it back. Yes.
Deborah, overview time for hypoglycemia and diabetes, and our special message that you always leave us with.
Oh, you know what? Realize that you can affect a change. That's the first thing I would tell people. It's like you are empowered to make a change in your life if you have the desire to do it. Is it going to be easy? Not always, but you know what? With practice, everything becomes easier. Make sure you consume proteins, make sure you get your oils in, you know, and look out for those highly processed carbohydrates, and you'll be on your way. And don't skip feedings. Do not skip breakfast. And start taking accountability for your health. I mean, you just need to do that today, because no one's going to babysit your medications. You're going to go to a different specialist for each problem you have. They're giving you different drugs. Some of those medications you're taking may be causing the symptom that's creating the next problem. So you have to babysit yourself, you know, kind of take care of yourself. Treat the baby like a baby. So I tell people, wonderful. If you had a baby, would you starve it for 6 hours? You know, your body still needs to be fueled every couple hours.
I hear you. As we do a closing, and there's so much more I'd love to ask you, but Barbara, what advice can you give our viewing audience to take home and into the grocery stores, et cetera, et cetera?
Just to be prepared, go to the store with a list, and just plan out for the week what you're going to be eating and what your needs are going to be. And it really gets a lot simpler after you kind of get that down pat and understand what you really need to be shopping for and eating.
Well, I thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
And sharing with us.
Thanks,
It's
Barbara.
always a pleasure. And I'll tell you, this is what 24 is now compared to what I was at 24, which you never would have gotten a list or anything else. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you. I'm your host, Kurt Hill.